Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to continue my conversation on the power of habit by Charles Duhigg. There's a topic that he discussed that I found very fascinating, and it gives you a good idea of really the core of what a habit really is. He uses the idea that some habits are uncontrollable, and he compares the individuals of two lives of a woman who has a gambling addiction and a man who has a history of sleepwalking, and he connects them together using this individual from the 1800s who um, convinced his brain that he was actually someone and therefore he became it. The woman had a gambling addiction because she really became a sort of the mother-like career in her family, and this became an issue because she would sit home all day while her kids would go to school and her husband would go to work all day, and she would be left thinking how she supply this family if she doesn't have a paying job or funds coming in. So she ends up going to the casino and becomes very good at blackjack. So she ends up becoming a little bit of addicted to gambling in a sense. And we all know gambling is a pretty bad addiction because it's kind of fishy whether you win or lose. But to her, and based on some research Charles Duhigg went through, uh, a near miss, even a near miss at the slots, to a pathological gambler is um, is actually considered a win for them because they just keep going and they don't stop because of a near miss. Whereas someone who occasionally goes to the casino, they would actually take a near miss as the nearest exit to the door. So he talks about how like when you go to the casino and you become addicted or you go through a habit, you're essentially your decision making part of your brain is turned off. So your part that is aware that you're doing something is turned off, and your habit kind of just runs supreme. So he also compares the individual of a man who has a history of sleepwalking, and he ends up committing a crime of murder in his sleep. Um, they ultimately deemed him not guilty for this murder because they figured because he was asleep and his decision making part of his brain was shut off at the time, and his fight or flight part of his brain or his human instinct habit was still turned on, that he had no full awareness of his decision, therefore he couldn't fully make the decision of not committing this crime. So they deemed him unguilty because he didn't have full awareness essentially. So he compares his lives to these two individuals who have different stories, who both um, don't have the ability to make that decision or the awareness to change their habit. But he also connects them using this man named William James, who was a man from the late 1800s. This is a long time ago, so um, this is something we can learn from in history. Uh, William James was a man who of a family of five other siblings, and all five of his siblings became very successful in their careers, which left him thinking I should become successful as well. But each time he went after a career that he liked, it kind of stopped short. He never became as successful as his siblings. So he vowed every day for the next 365 days, which is the year, to tell himself that he was successful. And eventually, after the 365 days of convincing his brain that he was successful, he became as so. So, really, what the connection is that we only have control over habits if we have the awareness to make that change. And our habits are deemed as something that our brain thinks we are, and therefore we are in general. So, if we can convince our brains enough that we are that person that we want to become, then that becomes essentially our habit and it becomes who we are. So he relates this to a metaphor of water and a quote that William James says. The quote is that habits bear us irresistibly towards our destiny. So our destiny is who we are, and the habits is what our brain thinks we are. So if we can convince our brains that we are that person, then that's what our habits will become. Um, and he also compares it to a metaphor of water, where water flows and then the current stops, and then it flows back to the same path that we left before, which is essentially our habit loop, over and over again of who we are as a person. So um, going back to the woman who had the gambling addiction, she convinced her brain enough that she was that person that was provided to her family and she was doing the right thing. Whereas the man didn't have full awareness over his ability, and therefore that wasn't actually who he was. That was just who his brain thought he was at the time. So it's very interesting to think that when we convince our brain of who we are, this is where our habits dictate, and this is essentially who we become in the end.